Hello there. My name is Mary Harelkin Bishop, and I am excited to share this updated version of Tunnels of Time with you. This story is a time travel adventure about Andrea, a 13-year-old girl who accidentally falls into the tunnels and goes back in time to the 1920s when gangsters were in Moose Jaw. Very quickly, Andrea finds herself having to work for the gangsters as a tunnel runner in the tunnels under Moose Jaw, just like the tunnel we're in right now. It's exciting but very dangerous work. We've updated some of the language, shortened the chapters, added great illustrations, and more resources such as historical notes and a Q&A with the author, me. The plot and action of the story are the same, as you will see when I read an exciting part for you right now. So, let's get started. The part I'm going to read for you, since we're in the tunnels, is the part when Andrea runs into the very first gangster. The gangster turned his attention back to Andrea. "So you don't know the ropes yet, huh, kid?" He spoke softly, yet Andrea felt chills chase one another up and down her spine. The tiny hairs on the back of her neck stood up in warning. This man, whoever he was dangerous. Every instinct in Andrea's body screamed for her to run, to escape before something terrible happened. But she stood rooted to the spot. Even if she could run, she had nowhere to go. No, sir," she heard herself whisper, deciding she had better concentrate on what he was saying. She didn't want to have any more trouble with him. She stared hard at his sparkling white and black patent leather shoes. They were so shiny, she was sure she could see her terrified features mirrored there. The man took a sinister step toward her, grabbed the back of her head and hair, and roughly jerked. It happened so quickly that Andrea didn't have time to dodge. She felt the cap on her head wobble and almost tumble to the floor. Luckily, it stayed in place, hiding her true identity. Andrea's head swung up, and she found herself staring helplessly into the man's face, tears of pain forming in her eyes. A deep, ugly scar ran down the side of the man's cheek. It was old Scarface. Andrea was sure of it. Who else would have a scar like that? "What you staring at, kid?" he demanded, pulling her hair even more tightly, causing Andrea to rise up on unsteady tiptoes to try to ease the pain. "So you don't like my face job, huh? This'll learn you a lesson." His eyes glittered angrily. He raised his hand as if to give her a backhand across the mouth when the clatter of footsteps was heard coming down the steep, narrow stairs. A wiry, nervous little man stood waving his arms in agitation, sputtering meaningless words into the blue air. "Well, speak up, man. We ain't got all day," old Scarface shouted. "The cops are coming to raid Scotty's," he finally managed to spit out. "What?" Scarface released Andrea abruptly. She sank to the floor at his feet, her knees having finally given out from panic and pain. "How do you know?" old Scarface shouted. Coffee. They were having coffee here and let it slip out. I overheard them." Scarface thumped a beefy, mean-looking fist into the palm of his other hand. "We gotta do something." His eyebrows suddenly shot up. "You," he yelled, grabbing Andrea once again by the hair. "You owe me for bursting into this joint, uninvited like that." He dragged her across the room and pulled the armoire roughly away from the wall. It creaked and groaned from the sudden movement, almost falling from its hinges. "In there, now!" "Where?" Andrea's mind screamed. The tunnel that she and Vance had just used was on the other end of the room. Only a small hole was visible in the dirt wall beneath the shiny armoire. It looked like the start of a tunnel, one that hadn't been completely hollowed out yet. In there?" Andrea whispered in horror. Even in her worst nightmares, she had never been subjected to the mortal terror he was now suggesting. I can't," she murmured, but her words were lost in the shuffling noises of the gravel under their feet. Somehow Vance found his way to her side. "It's okay, Andy," he he whispered as he grabbed her arm, pretending to help direct her into the black hole of doom. "This tunnel leads to Scotty's. Crawl as fast as you can. You must get there in time to warn them. That's the only way to get out of his bad books." He jerked his head in Scarface's direction. The small opening in the dirt loomed in front of her. Old Scarface bodily picked Andrea up and shoved her into the void. She fell to her hands and knees inside. Looking back over her shoulder in fear, she saw Scarface slam the armoire closed, leaving her in total and completely suffocating blackness. "Hurry, boy," he yelled. "You better make it in time or else." "Well then, I'd better get going," Andrea decided grimly. She set off on her hands and knees, crawling over rocks and large clumps of dirt. In the space of a few meters, her knees stung. Her hands were scratched and cut. Cobwebs hung low and slapped her in the face as she passed. Andrea shut her eyes and gritted her teeth. "Don't think about it," she said to herself as her imagination began to work overtime. But thoughts of spiders, immense and hairy with grotesque faces, began to haunt her thoughts. The narrow space was suddenly enlarged. With a sigh of relief, Andrea stood, crouched over, and ran, ecstatic to be able to move more swiftly. The darkness, though, was airless and stifling. She felt something thump her softly on the back and roll off. A scream jumped out of her open mouth, and she quickly clamped her own dirty hand over it to stop more noise from escaping. There was no telling if the sound would travel or not, but Andrea didn't want to take any chances of being heard. The journey felt endless. She was in a black hole of terror. There was no exit, and she was lost, doomed to starvation and certain death. No, she wouldn't go there in her thoughts. Don't panic. She forced her mind to think of other things. The tunnel curved. In the darkness, Andrea didn't see the turn. She ran into the side of the dirt wall. Part of it caved in, falling on her shoulders and back. Vance's hat threatened to jiggle loose on her head, and she quickly jammed it back into place. She ran on. She'd worry about the dirt later. Would this blackness never end? But soon it did, for just up ahead, Andrea could suddenly see a whisper of light escaping from a small hole. She stumbled and fell, picked herself up, and ran on, her eyes never straying from the deliverance of light ahead. It grew larger and brighter as Andrea closed in on it. It was a vent at waist level. Andrea bent down and peered breathlessly into the lighted area on the other side. It was the basement of a shoe store. There were boxes of shoes everywhere and tools and equipment that Andrea thought must be used for repairing and making shoes. The 6 men they had delivered earlier were there, along with 2 others and several women. A card game was in progress, and judging by the pile of money in the center of the table, there was gambling happening as well. All of this Andrea noted in a matter of nanoseconds. Now that she had reached her destination, she did not want to fail by forgetting to warn the people. "Hey," she called out weakly. She felt stupid and silly, calling from outside the room. "Did you hear something?" One of the women asked suspiciously, her head whipping back and forth to catch the faint sound. Everyone went stiff and still, as if they were expecting trouble of some sort. "Hey," Andrea called more loudly this time. "Over here, in the vent." 2 men jumped up from the table and quickly removed the vent cover. Andrea fairly leaped the meter or so down to the basement floor. It felt like paradise after her horrifying trip through that tunnel. "The cops are coming! There's going to be a raid!" "Raid!" they all shouted and jumped into action. 2 men forced the vent cover back into place as a woman swept up the dirt that had slid in with Andrea. Another tall cupboard like the armoire in the cafe was slid open, revealing a large hiding space. It looked as if it had originally been a small storage area. It now stood empty, ready to hide the fugitives from the police. The men, carrying their alcoholic beverages, cards, and money, scurried into the hollowed-out space and were quickly joined by the women. "Come on," one of them shouted to Andrea. "Get in here, quick!" Andrea raced across the room and into the crowded space just as pounding feet were heard on the wooden floor above. 2 men remained outside and shoved the cupboard closed, cleverly concealing the people hidden behind. Noisy feet clattered down the stairs and burst into the basement room. "This is a raid!" one of the cops shouted as they skidded to a stop in the silent room. So there's Andrea with a bunch of people she doesn't know, stuck in a closet. What do you think will happen? Will she still have to work for the bad guys, for the gangsters? Will she ever get back to the present and find her family again? I guess to find out, you'll have to read Tunnels of Time.